Okay, so we are now on our third little piece. We're going to be talking about some generalizations that you can use for the functions of those epithelial tissues. And then we're also going to talk about glands, which are actually derived from epithelial tissues. Okay, so let's look at it. So most of the epithelial tissues can be either simple, so one layer, or stratified, more than one layer, except for those two weird ones that I just talked about. So when you look at them, the ones that are simple, that means that they have only one single cell, very, very thin, and that's important. Surfaces that require exchange between the kind of space and the body, so bringing things into the body, those are going to require a simple epithelial tissue. So let me give you an example to show you what I'm talking about. So in the lungs, you have these structures, the little air sacs called alveoli. And those alveoli, that is the site where gas exchange occurs. That is where oxygen goes into the blood and carbon dioxide goes into the lungs so that you can breathe it out. So a lot of exchange has to happen. That means that these molecules have to pass through the cells. And so if we're trying to make it really easy for those things to pass through, are we going to want to make it so they have to go through lots of layers? Or are we going to make it so it's very thin? And in fact, it's not only one layer thick, but also it's the thinnest possible cells as well. Okay, so how would you name the epithelial lining of those alveoli? One layer, simple, very, very flat, squamous epithelium. Simple, squamous epithelium. Okay, so the thinnest possible layer to make it really, really easy for oxygen and carbon dioxide to pass through the cells. Okay, so any kind of exchange, you're going to have a simple. So the general function for those simple epithelial tissues is going to be the same. You can say secretion and absorption, or you can say diffusion, or you can say exchange. However the word helps you is good for me. Okay, so simple exchange. Whereas stratified means lots of layers. Okay, so it means two or more, but usually it means lots of layers. Okay, so for example, here's the esophagus. The esophagus is the soft tube that takes food down into the stomach. Now for the esophagus doesn't do any kind of secretion of anything. It doesn't absorb into the body, so nothing needs to pass through the cells. It's just the muscular tube that allows for transport to the stomach. And so if you're not trying to exchange anything, there's no point in being thin. Okay, instead, it's going to be stratified because the more layers that you have, the better protection. Okay, so another example, skin. The outer layer of your skin is also going to be stratified squamous epithelium. Lots and lots of layers. If your cells get scraped off, it's okay. You're still very protected. Okay, so in general, simple will be for things like secretion and absorption, and stratified will be for things like protection, usually things like protection from abrasion and that kind of stuff. Okay, so you can swallow some chunky chips and they can scrape their way down. It's okay, you're fine. Okay, good protective barrier. Okay, let's talk about the two different types of stratified squamous epithelium. I sort of talked about it a little bit already. The first is keratinized. Keratinized. And what that means is, so here is stratified squamous epithelium, but you could also say that this is keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. And that's because the very top layer here, that is going to be filled with keratin, which is just a protein. Okay, so for the keratin, the cells are so much filled with keratin that they're not even alive anymore. They're mostly just sacs of keratin at this point. So why? Why would you kill off your cells and fill them with keratin? What possible advantage would you have to making your skin keratinized? Water protection. Okay, so most of this is about sealing the water, the moisture in the body, but it also helps protect the body from external environment as well. Okay, so it makes it so that you're watertight so that you prevent against water loss. That's the big reason to be keratinized. Okay, the second type would be non-keratinized. The non-keratinized is going to be found in the esophagus. And if you look at this in comparison to this one, here's a solid cell, like sort of pack layers on the top. Non-keratinized will be kind of more soft, and you can still see that the cells are very much alive and they're not filled with keratin. This is non-keratinized stratified epithelium, stratified squamous epithelium. Okay, a couple of cells I want to talk about. The first is goblet cells. So when you look at this, let's practice. Here's a free surface. We see a free surface, and therefore this must be an epithelial tissue. Okay, what's the next question? Number of layers. Now this stuff down here, this is a connective tissue. We're not talking about connective tissues yet. So we're just looking at from here to here. When you look at the nucleus, are they all lined up in one layer, or are there more than one layer? One layer. So the word for that is simple. Then when we look at the nucleus, we see some cytoplasm stacked on the top of it. That tells us columnar, and this is an epithelium. So this right here would be simple columnar epithelium. Now for the simple columnar epithelium, you're going to see a lot of the times you have a different type of cell, a little fat kind of, usually they're either lighter staining or sometimes darker, but usually lighter staining, embedded within the normal columnar cells. That's called a goblet cell. Now, simple columnar epithelium lines most of the digestive tract. And as you go through the intestines, so from the stomach into the small intestine, into the large intestine, you're going to have more and more goblet cells. Why? They secrete mucus. And as they secrete that mucus, that's going to help lubricate the food to go out. Because as the food is traveling through the digestive system, it's going to be pulling out the water, reabsorbing the water back into the body. Again, simple, good for absorption. Okay, pulling the water back in, that'll make it harder. And so you need some lubricant to keep it through. So I'm only telling you that story now so that you hopefully remember that goblet cells secrete mucus. That is the function of those goblet cells, and they're going to be seen in the simple columnar epithelium. Okay, so remember, especially lining the digestive tract. And they're also going to be seen in the pseudostratified columnar epithelium. Those are the ones that, let me see if I can get that real quick for you. Okay, oh, there's none shown, sorry. The pseudostratified columnar epithelium, and that is to secrete the mucus so that it'll trap debris and so the cilia can sweep it out. The function of goblet cells is to secrete mucus, or actually mucin that becomes mucus. Okay, the last little piece of the epithelial lecture that I need you to understand is that the glands that we're going to talk about throughout the semester, glands are derived from epithelial tissues. And there are two different types of glands. We have endocrine glands and we have exocrine glands. And the good news is if you know what endo means and exo means, it's pretty easy to figure out which is which. So endo means inside, and exo means outside. So they have to do with where do they secrete their product, okay? Is it into the body, into the bloodstream, or is it onto the body surface? Let's start with endocrine glands. So there's quite a lot of different endocrine glands, and endocrine glands secrete a very particular product, and that product is a hormone. And hormones are good for regulating the activities of other body systems. They're chemical messengers. They tell things what to do. And so what they do is they produce these hormones, and then those hormones are secreted into the bloodstream. So because they are secreted kind of into the body, they're going to be called endocrine glands. Endo means inside. And that prefix comes up over and over again. So if you don't have it on your prefix list, make sure you add it onto that prefix list. Okay, endo, inside. Okay, so because they're secreting directly into the bloodstream, they do not need any ducts because they're not taking their product onto a surface. Okay, so the reason I have this right here, this is a histology of the thyroid. This is the thyroid gland right here, kind of straddles the trachea. The reason I put this on here is because when you look at it, hopefully it looks very, you know, kind of familiar to you at this point. Okay, so here's kind of a free surface. There are some cells that looks a lot like an epithelial tissue. I just wanted to highlight the fact that these endocrine and exocrine glands are derived from epithelial tissues. Okay, the second type of gland is an exocrine gland, and they're called exocrine glands because they secrete some kind of product onto the surface of the body. And remember, it doesn't have to be an external surface. Okay, so you can be, for example, like sweat. Sweat is secreted onto the external surface, but they can also be into the body. So for example, what I'm showing you right here, these are called acinar cells. And acinar cells can be found inside of the pancreas, and they produce pancreatic enzymes that are involved with digestion into the small intestine, right? So that is a surface inside of the body, still exocrine gland. Okay, so the products can be things like sweat or digestive enzymes or mucus, that kind of stuff. Okay, so let's look at some of the structures. So when we look at this gland right here, this is called an eccrine sweat gland. So one of the different types, the most common type of sweat gland. You see that it has this coil here. This is the duct. And if you look carefully, again, you'll start to see, yes, it looks a lot like an epithelial tissue, sort of like a tube all coiled around. And it definitely has a duct taking it up to the surface. This is an exocrine gland, which is derived from epithelial tissue. Okay, that's enough for now. See you later.